So, yeah, so tonight we're going to introduce the plan. I'm going to take you through it in a presentation. It's about 30 pages, the plan, not the presentation. But there's a lot in there. So I just want to make sure that we go through all the different components. I'm going to share my screen and I won't be able to see you. So if somebody has a question, please stop me and yell at me and I will pause to take that question. So I'm going to just share a second. Oh, okay. I can see some of you, but not all. Can everyone see this presentation?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So I will get started. Just going to take you through the background, kind of how we got here. I think most of you are pretty familiar with that, but how this fits into Madison's overall planning context, and then the particular goals that were developed for this redevelopment plan, the permitted uses, the development planning and other design standards. We'll touch on offsite improvements and then where we go from here once this plan presumably is adopted and how we get there. So just a little bit of background, as I think you all know, all of this is falling under New Jersey's local redevelopment and housing law, which provides all the statutory processes and requirements for redevelopment planning. Unlike traditional zoning, this really does create more tailored standards and rules and regulations for particular sites and developments. It allows you, as you'll see, to get into a lot more detail on things like design and landscaping, amenities, offsite improvements, all kinds of things that are particular to a site. So it is, a very important tool in the planning toolbox. And it is also subject to very specific requirements, including the designation requirements. First, you have to, as you know, designate that the area is an area in need of redevelopment before you can actually do the plan. So how we got here, we have a proposal, for this 138 unit for sale development. It's a combination of townhouses and stacked units in a flat or multifamily configuration. So of that 138 units, 28 of them will be designated as affordable for sale. So all of it is for sale. And that was included, as you know, in the amended third round housing plan, element and fair share plan, which you all adopted in June of last year. Subsequent to that, later in the summer, the Borough Council adopted a redevelopment designation after we had done an area in need of redevelopment study that we talked about at one of our planning board meetings. So all of this has gone through the standard process of redevelopment to get to this point. Once the designation occurred in late July, we really have been working since then with the developer to really iron out all of these details that we'll go through tonight. So it's been a lot of meetings, a lot of time spent to get to this point, and you'll see exactly how detailed all of it gets. So in terms of the contents of the redevelopment plan, there's a little bit of description of the area itself, the process, again, how we got there. There is a set of goals that are, again, particular to this development and this site. And then we get into the meat of the plan, which is really all of the standards that will be applied once the redevelopment area has been designated. Again, it replaces the zoning for the site. So this becomes the development parameter for the future development. You have to talk about how the redevelopment plan is consistent with local and regional and adjoining community plans. And then there's a piece on implementation, compliance. A lot of that is boilerplate, but it's very important. And then definitions, also very important, because in some cases, how something is defined might differ in this redevelopment plan versus the regular zoning. So it's important to make sure that you define that very clearly and that makes sense. Okay. So in terms of the goals for this particular redevelopment plan, there is some overlap and similarity with the one Giralda redevelopment plan, which you're all familiar with, but this is also very unique to this site. So similar to that plan, this plan really does seek to respect the history and the environmental context of the campus of Giralda Farms, recognizing it's a unique place. In terms of environmental impact, it's really meaning to minimize land disturbance, especially impervious coverage, use green, low impact development techniques, green design for buildings and infrastructure, all of that to minimize and mitigate the environmental impact of the future development. This plan is intended to provide a mix of both market rate and affordable units that are incorporated throughout the development as required by state law, and that do provide the same level of amenities, whether they're affordable or market rate. An aspect of this plan similar to One Giralda is that it would preserve a significant part of the site. It's about 3.5 acres. which is contiguous to the existing Giralda Farm preserve. And so then that would create connection to both that preserve as well as the land that was already preserved or the future preserved open space at 1 Giralda. So it's meant to be, continuous with that. This plan seeks to provide for pedestrian and bicycle connections to the existing network, particularly on Madison Avenue as well as Treadwell Avenue. As you all know, I think there's a nearly continuous walking path around Giralda Farms, and the Treadwell piece is an important link that is actually kind of a missing link so far or currently. So we've been looking significantly at that frontage as well. The plan seeks to provide high quality architecture using high quality materials that is respecting the setting of Giralda Farms and blends well with the campus uses that are already present. But as you'll see in the design standards, really a decidedly residential design here. I know that's something that came up in the 1 Giralda process as well. We are making this a residential development, residential looking development. And then lastly, provision of adequate utility systems to serve the future development, and then incorporate as needed upgrades both on-site and off-site, which we'll talk about. So getting into the standards for the plan. The permitted uses is fairly simple. There's really just 2 sets of permitted uses. It's attached residential units, whether they're in townhouse or stacked format, that are in a mix of both market rate and affordable units. And those can be very low, and moderate income units. As you all know, those mixes are subject to state law. And then the other permitted use is the open space piece of the property, which ultimately will be subdivided out similar to how 1 Giralda was. So open space, walking paths, and similar related amenities. And then accessory uses are basically just whatever amenity space is there to serve the residents of the development, and just other things that might be customarily incidental and accessory. So fairly straightforward on the uses. And now the bulk standards. So a lot of this is I'm going to spend some time on it actually. It is based on the particulars of the site and the setbacks and the roadway network. So the minimum lot area is the size of the site, 21.15 acres. The maximum density is, as I mentioned, what the proposed development is. It's 138 total units. Of those, 28 or 20% would be affordable. Maximum impervious coverage would be 40%. That minimum contiguous open space, which I touched on, was 3.5 acres. And then we get into building height. And this is where we're using some graduated heights, because we spent a lot of time with this developer on setbacks, and particularly focused on the Madison and Treadwell Avenue frontages, because we know that that's of great concern to those neighborhoods. So the maximum height along the portion of the site that fronts on Madison Avenue is 45 feet for the buildings. On Treadwell Avenue and along the property line with 1 Giralda, it's 55 feet. All other buildings, except for the 1-story clubhouse, are at 65 feet. These are all 3 stories. And the reason why there's a differential in height, I know this is a question Dennis had, was how can a 65-foot building be 3 stories? It has to do with the grading and the topography of the site and how the building height is measured based on the average grade. And so it actually works out to a taller building, even though it's still 3 stories, just because of the way that that's measured. And it also has to do with the pitch of the roof. So unless you want kind of either flat or squat roofs to get an adequate pitch that looks appropriate, you need a little bit more height, but they would be capped at 3 stories for all of these buildings. And then setbacks kind of goes hand in hand with building height. We heard very strongly on the 1 Giralda application, there was a lot of concern about the Madison Avenue frontage. So we wanted to be sure that we were matching that frontage, and that we were also providing a really generous setback on Madison Avenue to mitigate impact on the neighborhoods across the street, and to provide really significant area for landscaping and buffering. So from that Madison Avenue setback, it's 140 feet. From Treadwell, it's 60 feet. That property line is currently very wooded, and that is meant to stay. That being said, there is a lot of invasive bamboo that is going to be cleared out, but it will be replaced with similar, effective buffering on the Treadwell Avenue frontage. So it's 60 feet there. It's a bit closer on the 1 Giralda side, which is going to be the developed side of the property, 25 feet. And then from the open space parcel at the south, the future open space parcel, it's 100 feet. So really kind of clustering on the center of the property and trying to provide as much setback as we can to all of the neighboring setbacks. Okay. So looking at the residential buildings themselves, these are just some sort of interesting standards here. We wanted to make sure that the buildings, the individual buildings of townhome clusters will be fairly small. So they're maxed out at no more than 6. And the initial concept plans that the developer has prepared range from 3 to 6 units per cluster. So you're not going to be looking at a row of 10 townhomes. That was something that we wanted to make sure that we were controlling the scale of that. When you look at the multifamily buildings, the sort of multifamily style, it's anticipated there'll be 2 at this point, and they'll be put not right next to each other, not on one side of the property. They will be put at different parts of the property, and they will be maxed out at 14 per building. So we're not going to get big apartment buildings. They're going to be at a smaller scale that will blend in and complement the townhouses. In terms of distance between each building, it's 20 feet to make sure that we're not putting these on top of each other. And then any individual building facade can be no more than 145 feet, again, to try to create that smaller scale. Okay, looking at the affordability mix and then the amenities and requirements for the affordable units. As I said, that's the 20% set aside. And then within that set aside, 4 of those affordable units have to be in the townhome configuration and indistinguishable from the rest of the market rate townhomes. So you won't be able to tell that those are the affordable units. And those also have to be 3 bedrooms. So those are all in that townhome configuration. The other of the 28 units, so a total of 24, can be put in the stacked multifamily buildings. And again, those will be distributed throughout the site and in the 2 different buildings. They won't be right next to each other. They won't be put away in one part of the site. And then those stacked buildings will need to use comparable materials, colors, design of their exterior so that they will blend in again with those townhome units. And then every affordable unit has to comply with UHAC and borough standards. So then when we looked at amenities, we wanted to be sure that this is also state law, but we wanted to be sure that it's very clear in the plan that the affordable units have all the access to the same community amenities that the market rate buyers do. And also that when you're looking at the internal units, the interior finishes, that the affordable buyers will have access to the same standard that the market rate buyers have. Now we understand from Toll Brothers, the developer, that market rate buyers will have the ability to upgrade certain features if they want to choose that model, but they will both get the same base model. And then on-site amenities have to be provided to the affordable buyers at no additional fee. So they're not going to be paying a community facility fee or pool fee or anything like that. There will be an HOA fee that applies to the affordable units as well, but we understand from Toll Brothers that they have a formula to adjust that for affordable units. So it will be an adjusted HOA fee. Okay, landscaping and tree removal. I know this is something very important to the borough, very much an interest. So we have some basic parameters here in terms of overall landscaping. There's a minimum of 55% of the site that has to be landscaped coverage. Anything that basically is not impervious should be landscaped. It has to be low maintenance. It has to use native plantings, really minimizing lawn areas that need fertilizers and pesticides. Then we get into trees. And this is an application that there are existing trees on the site. There will be trees that have to come down to accommodate this development. There's really no getting around it. It's not a small number. We don't have a final number. A lot of those trees are not original growth trees. They are associated with the office landscaping. But whatever is removed is going to be subject to the borough's existing replacement requirements. So there is a maximum, first of all, a cap of 40% of those existing trees. So they can't take out more than 40%, whether those trees are native or invasive. They can't take them out just because they're invasive. That counts toward the 40%. If there are trees that are dead or dying based on consultation with the arborist, those don't have to count toward the 40%. But otherwise, there's a 40% cap. And then any tree that they remove, whether it's native, invasive, or dead or dying, all of that is going to count toward the borough's replacement requirements. So they are not absolved of meeting those requirements. And further, they have to plant a certain number of those replacement trees on site. So they can't just pay into the in lieu fund for all of them. They have actually committed to, and it's in the plan, planting a minimum of 2 trees for every 1 tree removed on their property, or if they come to agreement with One Giralda or the future open space parcel owner, they could plant those trees there. If you know anything about this site, the portion that would be the future open space parcel happens to actually not have a lot of trees on it. That's a little bit more of open grass, kind of shrubs. So there's a lot of opportunity to really, kind of plant that site, forest it. So it could provide a lot of those on-site replacement trees. Anything that they can't put on site, they are able to pay into the in lieu fund, which is part of your existing tree ordinance. And then we spent a lot of time with them talking about priorities for trees, and it's clear in the plan that the property lines along Madison and Treadwell really are high priority for replacement trees, again, to achieve that buffering, to fill in gaps, and especially where they have to remove invasive vines and bamboo. Okay, so parking, everything basically has to be in a driveway or garage, or there are going to be some surface parking lots scattered throughout the site. Because not all of the stacked units are going to have garages. Some will within the building, and some will have surface parking. Basically, there will be no on-street parking allowed on these internal roadways. That's the typical HOA kind of arrangement. And each unit will have to have at least 2 spaces. In addition to that, there's going to be dedicated visitor parking requirements for 1/4 of a space that have to be designated in those parking lots. So it kind of works out to 2 1/4 spaces per unit. And then in terms of bicycle parking, it's assumed that the townhouses will have bike parking in their garages. For the other units that are stacked, they'll have a requirement of 1/2 a space per unit for bike racks, bike parking or racks. So we did spend a lot of time on sustainable and green design. And I know Rachel Ehrlich, when she was still a councilwoman, she actually looked at this quite a bit. So I'm happy that she's going to have some further input on this. But we have a whole set of base features that will be part of every unit, whether it's market rate or affordable. So we're looking at, cold climate air source heat pumps. Every unit will have provision for future conversion to electric induction rangers and dryers. They will all have EV make-ready garages and EV spaces in the parking lots. And then all of the units will provide energy and efficient insulation, windows, HVAC, and water heaters. And then we also really wanted to make sure, because we're thinking about these are for sale units, the buying of appliances is a really significant expense for these affordable unit buyers. So for all of the affordable units, they will have base features that are offered in each of their units, being washing machines, dishwashers, refrigerators, and clothes dryers. And all of those will be Energy Star certified, energy efficient. So they will not have to buy those themselves. And they will also be equipped with WaterSense certified plumbing features, like shower heads and toilets and faucets. The clubhouse building is, as I mentioned, it's a 1-story building, and that is going to have, is required to have a solar roof, unless they can demonstrate with an analysis to the planning board that it's not feasible. But all buildings, regardless, will be constructed and pre-wired to be solar ready. And then lastly, a construction waste management plan is part of a required piece of the application. Okay, so further on building design, landscaping, this is where we get into the materials and the architecture. You see, and I'll actually on the next slide, there's some conceptual renderings. There's the developer's conceptual renderings, and then we also provided some more aspirational images to really get at what the borough is looking for in terms of variations of roof lines and quality of equipment, not equipment, materials, massing, articulation of variation in buildings. So all of that is really coming through in these standards. And when it comes to you all for site plan approval, that is where I think you'll have some give and take with the applicant. You'll hear from the architect. You'll be able to sort of see how their designs meet these standards. But regardless, it's, as I mentioned, there's a requirement that it be a residential scale of development. So we are really not looking for industrial or corporate design. This is a neighborhood basically. We talked about landscaping and screening along property boundaries, as well as between buildings, and screening of mechanicals, HVAC, parking lots, etc. They have a little bit of variation from the code on retaining walls. They needed a little bit more height than the current regulations allow, so they're capped at 5 feet for individual retaining walls, but those must be tiered with landscaping in between. And then when they ultimately subdivide out the open space parcel, it will be required to have a fence along that property line that matches the one on Madison Avenue. So here are just a couple of the conceptual images. What you see on the left is the Madison Avenue fronting building. As you see, there are no garages on this side. They would be on the back side of that building. That was something we talked about at length with the developer. We do not want to see garages on Madison Avenue. So that is a part of the plan as well. And so you'll see the frontage of this building 140 feet back. So quite a generous setback. And then what you see on the right is the concept for the stacked building, which you see does use a lot of the same materials. It also has a pitched roof. And the idea is that it is meant to blend in, again, with the other townhomes. Okay, so lighting, access, a little bit of grab bag. We have a whole section on lighting. Everything, whether it's exterior or interior, has to be LED or Energy Star certified, dark sky compliant, and then limited through either dimming or timers on those overnight lighting. Pole heights are limited based on what they are: 8 feet for internal roadways and 14 feet for parking lots. There's also provision for small bollards as well. Access is only from Madison Avenue and then the internal roadway to Giralda Farms. So there will be an emergency only vehicular access from Treadwell Avenue, but that will be closed off. It will not be used unless, in case of emergencies. The whole place will have to have sidewalks on internal roadways on at least one side, with street trees that are required at certain intervals. To make sure that we're having a pedestrian network, both internal and connecting to the existing sidewalk network on Treadwell and Madison. And then this is a little bit of the experience of One Giralda. They are going to have to disturb some of the slopes. So they have, rather than getting a variance later, they really don't want to have variances. So they wanted to get this in the plan, that there's an allowable slope disturbance from your current regulation. This is pretty comparable to what was granted actually to One Giralda, these percentages. So it's kind of similar. A lot of those slopes are actually man-made. They were put in to accommodate the existing office building, which is sort of built into a slope. So there will be some disturbance there. Okay, I think this is getting toward the end. Utilities and offsite improvements. I think a lot of this is fairly standard, but something that we always want to see. Everything needs to be underground or screened. If it cannot be put underground, best practices for stormwater management, that includes low impact and green standards. Anything that is a required easement, there is some sort of cross access, cross utility easements that will be required with One Giralda. So similar to that application, all those easements have to be provided to the borough. And then this is an important offsite improvement, the walking path on Treadwell, which, as you know, it's only one portion of Treadwell, and then the rest of the street has no walking path or sidewalk even. So that is a current gap in the walkway around Giralda Farms. So on their portion of the property, the developer is going to continue that path and then through their property to connect with the open space parcel. So that is going to be a real benefit to the surrounding area to expand that pedestrian network. And then this is, again, similar to One Giralda. There will be a weekday shuttle bus required. They're free, and hopefully they will coordinate that with One Giralda Farms as well as others on the campus, so that maybe there's one shuttle that serves multiple properties. And then lastly, this is something that they're negotiating with the borough as part of the development agreement. They're going to have to pay their prorated share of any offsite utility infrastructure that's going to be required. And that'll be prorated based on their impact. They're talking about that with One Giralda as well. So that is being talked about with the borough. And then just the last piece, kind of other requirements. When they come to you for site plan approval, they'll have to provide scaled color elevations, photo simulations. You can request a materials board if you like. The signage should be coordinated with One Giralda, which was sort of talked about in that application, just to make sure that the whole campus is cohesive, especially when it comes to wayfinding, so people can make their way easily. They'll have to provide a traffic impact statement and a study of the school system and the fiscal impacts to the borough. And then whatever is not addressed in this plan is subject to all other borough regulations. Okay, so that was a whirlwind through the requirements. I'm going to pause for a second, ask if there are any questions, because this is the final slide. Or maybe I'll just do the final slide and then I'll stop sharing so I can see you. So if you feel ready to make a recommendation to the Borough Council that they should adopt this redevelopment plan, Once that is done and it goes to Borough Council and they adopt the plan, it does become the zoning for the area. So the next step in the process would be that the borough, with the council, would execute a redevelopers agreement. That is something that they're starting to talk about. And then they will ultimately come back to you for a site plan application. So again, that's where you can really get into some of the discussions on building materials, design, landscaping. Anything that they do need to vary from the redevelopment plan would require a variance or a plan amendment. So they're obviously seeking to avoid that, but it is always a choice that is available if needed. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, get some water, and take questions.